Eternalism versus secularism, by the way, that's the name of the article. Eternalism versus secularism. And this is a point that I'm going to hit pretty hard about secularism. Secularism sprouts out of academia more than anywhere else, right? The religion of academia, ironically, is secularism. And what is the primary secular movement of academia? It's critical social justice. Right, so this goes hand in hand with what he's talking about here, and he gets very specific on things that I think you'll find is very interesting. So, the summary of the article is eternalism focuses on changing the individual. Right? That's savior theology. That's our behavior, changing our behavior, repenting, moving forward with the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ. That's what eternalism is about, changing the individual by teaching him correct principles. Secularism tends to deal increasingly with adjustments outside men, and he'll go over this. Like what? Like systems, like systemic. The shortfall of secularism, with its frequent failure to answer satisfactorily the long-range cost-effectiveness questions concerning what really benefits man, in fact, calls attention to itself. Errant to random do-goodism. Think about the words that he's using here. Errant to random do-goodism, which you can quantify a little bit as being motivated by compassion without perhaps reason, has so often been sincere, but has ended up being ineffective or is reminiscent of straightening deck chairs on the Titanic. The wrong kind of help. This to me is critical race theory and social justice. The wrong kind of help isn't really helpful. It is often harmful, racist in itself, divisive. For solutions become problems. So oftentimes if we've got the wrong approach, we're using the wrong solution, that solution actually becomes the bigger problem than the issue it intends to help, to solve, right? Secular efforts, for example, have tried over the centuries and in many ways to redistribute wealth. Now, we can look at what's happening today in a little bit of a different mode of looking back. What he's focusing on primarily here, as you can look at, is socialism/communism. And so he's focusing on the redistribution of wealth, trying to help out the poor and pulling from the rich, right? That can be transferred to today with what we might call social credit. And seeing the different marginalized groups or any demographic, any group that is found within any collective inside of intersectionality is going to be given there's a way, a Marxian way that we find in social justice that tries to even everything out. And that doesn't mean we don't want to even things out. We do want to even things out. But hard leftism and Marxian tenets that try to do this become the bigger problem. So he says again, and that's the secular movement of the left, of the hard left, is Marxian tenets. Everything in the radical hard left movement that we find ourselves drowning in today is rooted in a Marxian tenet or several Marxian tenets. That doesn't mean they don't push back on some of those things. A lot of times you'll hear that there's pushback and they don't really follow Marxism. If you listen to anyone or read anyone who has produced things about critical race theory or social justice or the biggest pundits such as Ibram Kendi and the founders of critical race theory, Richard Delgado and Gene Stefancic and Kimberly Crenshaw, they all support these Marxian tenets. They all want to rip down liberal democracy, all of them. It's not my words. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a bogeyman, right? It is their own words. Or in those remarkable but few episodes, like the City of Enoch, the small branches of Middle East Christians in the Apostolic era, and the brief but happy period AD 36 to 201 on the American hemisphere from the Book of Mormon, where the lines between rich and poor were dissolved by the warmth and righteousness of practicing Christians. Charity. Right? You have to have charity. Meritocracy, goodness, eternalism, charity are what need to fight against problems of racism and disparity and oppression, etc. Not secularism. Critical social justice is as secular as you can get. It spawns out of academia. He goes on and says, secularism has yet to bring about such parallel circumstances in spite of the many utopias attempted. So many youth today have not been taught what has happened in the 20th century. They'll hear about Nazism and the horrors there. But many of them, even well into their 20s, don't know anything about the Bolshevik Revolution. They don't know anything about the gulags. They don't know anything about Stalinism, Pol Pot, Castro, the horrors of North Korea and the Maoist cultural revolution. They don't hear about that. Where you had 6 million Jews die in horror with Nazi Germany in charge. With the utopia, the other, right, that was a German Aryan utopia. With the utopia of the leftists, you had over 100 million people die and countless more imprisoned, starving, tortured, put into poverty, just absolute horrors that has changed many of those countries that they still haven't been able to recover from. The utopia that is desired today does not have a basis to it of how it's going to actually be there, other than we're going to topple liberal democracy. We're going to get justice where it is needed. We're going to break down the oppressors. But there's nothing in place of that works. There's no solution that's actually there. It is secularism. Neil A. Maxwell goes on and says the new secular moral geometry, as he calls it, with its fluid lines, alien angles, and restless points, he has such a way with words, always did, rejects the idea of divine design in the universe, but then naively seeks to muster righteous indignation, justice, in behalf of the disadvantaged, but without any corresponding concern over the need for non-economic morality or demographic morality today, the very values necessary to make indignation righteous. It pulls you away from righteousness. It pulls you away from a doctrine of Christ and the plan of salvation. He goes on and says, while there are often, as between eternalism and secularism, shared concerns, right? So you can say eternalism and the gospel of Jesus Christ being concerned about race relations as an example, right? And as is a big topic right now. And you have a concern that most have that adopt social justice about racism, right? Even though they don't always know the underlying vehicle that's actually carrying them. There is also a very sharp divergence, he says, in terms of the solutions proposed. So again, this is, as we've gone over things that you've heard from the BYU professors, as you hear members of the church and others try and conflate a hard leftist, secular solution to rooting out racism, the charge of the prophet that he's given us. Understand the difference here, as he's going over primarily economic issues that communism was focused on and socialism were focused on. The difference today is that it's done with the demographics of collectives of individuals, or of collectives of race and sexual orientation, or of gender identity, or ableism, and many other intersectional collectives. There is a sharp divergence, please understand that, between eternalism, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and a secular approach like critical race theory and intersectionality. They can't work together. They are divergent completely. There are some shared concerns, but in the end, when you get to the core of each of those, they are driven by different motives, and they are driven to different ends. Here's another one that goes exactly against what you see in critical social justice today. He says, eternalism places a high value on work per se. Work, right? Meritocracy, hard work. He says, secularism often finds itself trying to reduce the necessity for work without showing corresponding concern as to the purposes to which leisure time should be put. Expect more idleness or pleasure seeking.